Very good evening. Thanks for tuning in this evening, The Truth Tonight Talk Radio. I'm Roxy Lopez. We have a great guest this evening, so you might want to buckle down. I know a lot of you who are very interested in my guest's work and background and experience. It's quite fascinating. We're going to jump right into it because there is a lot to cover here. So I'm going to omit my general first 5-10 minutes of what's going on in the world today. And we're going to jump right into this wonderful interview. Of course, you know, my guest this evening is David Sereda. And his first aspiration in life was to become an astronaut, believe it or not. And in 1968, David and a friend witnessed a UFO along with hundreds of other witnesses. After this experience, David grew up as a UFO enthusiast. Of course he would. Never living in doubt of the phenomena that was swept the world since the Roswell incident in 1947, which was huge. His interest in space, religion, philosophy, astronomy, and science led him on his career in related fields. He has worked deeply in high technology, on environmental and humanitarian issues, and as a professional photographer for over 20 years. He has studied world religion, science, physics, and paranormal psychology for over 25 years. Other interests include alternative energy, propulsion, and anti-gravity. And over the years, David Sereda branched out into quantum vibration, jewelry, and harmonic resonance. And in 2013, David's lectures have been focused on something absolutely fascinating, and I can't wait to hear all about it. It's about the new technology he extracted from the mass in the Great Pyramid of Egypt as a giant crystal oscillator that allows for faster-than-light communication with a Stargate system. This is fascinating. He'll also share his numerous experience with alien contact. You might know David Sereda from a fabulous 240-minute documentary entitled From Here to Andromeda. And in brief, we may touch on this because it's absolutely one of the most stunning documentaries I've come across in the past. From Here to Andromeda opens with the possibility that humanity may not survive due to global warming and ensuing ice age or mass extinction. The question is, why hasn't humanity embraced sustainable technologies like solar, wind, helium-3 fusion to beat global warming? Why are the oil companies holding us hostage? Good question. Why hasn't all of humanity awakened and taken measures to ensue our survival? This has come up over and over again, the idea that we are owned by the energy companies. And it really does hold us back as a planet. There are many UFOs that are suddenly appearing all over the world, by the way. And are they here to teach us? Are they here to help humanity make a quantum leap? I do believe they are. If you want to take a look at one of the websites that David has, it's called www.lightstreamtechnologies.com. We'll go ahead and put that in the chat room for you. Tonight, David is going to explain to us his latest findings about the Giza Plateau and quantum entanglement. Two objects that are quantum entangled communicate with one another in an unknown, instantaneous manner that Einstein called spooky action at a distance. It has recently been discovered that this doesn't just apply to subatomic particles. Two diamonds have been entangled, and not only that, they were brought together at all, but rather encoded with identical vibrations. This implies the possible existence of a powerful new tool, and David Sereda makes the leap that the structures on the Giza Plateau might actually be such a tool capable of connecting us to distant parts of the universe in a whole new way. So, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Mr. David Sereda. David, welcome to the show, and honored to have you, and thanks for being here.
Roxy, thanks for having me on your show. I just traveled from Sedona, Arizona, and my wife and baby and I, and crossed the border where we're now exploring living in the Great White North. So to do much deeper experiments where we can be more undisturbed by the obsessive spying and observing of our people, our supposedly free people. So I had to get out of there because actually when I started doing a lot of these transmissions using pyramid technology and opening up portals between Sedona and other star systems, there were too many disturbances by the military, radar planes flying right over our house and Black Hawks flying right over our house. And I actually ended up meeting at a toy store in Phoenix last Christmas when I was looking at little remote-controlled toys for my daughter. A guy who was working in there was a Black Hawk helicopter specialist who had had a serious accident in the war in Afghanistan. And he was just telling me how they have these antenna arrays hooked up to the helicopters, and they can see every transmission device, every waveform of every electronic device via their computer screen. And he was telling me all the frequencies they look at. And I was actually describing to him, one of my transmitters, and he said, we see everything. It's kind of like the Matrix for them. They're looking literally at numbers, which are what frequencies are, and they're seeing if there's any abnormalities in the world of transmissions, because that's where you would have a potential supposed threat, meaning somebody communicating via means that they're not normally supposed to be communicating through. And that's what alerts them. So when you're doing something that's opening up a portal, it's a red flag. And many times, my wife and I, when we had these devices on, the helicopters would just come right for the house, and we just rush to turn it off. And near the very end, before we left, we actually just left them on, just to let them really see it, because we knew we were going to be leaving. But what I have discovered, something in the Great Pyramid that is so shocking, that it literally, because math is so respected, supposedly so respected, I'm really flabbergasted that nobody in the academic world has come to me and said, there's no doubt that it's inarguable what you've discovered, and it's absolute mathematical proof that the builder of the Great Pyramid was a civilization that it was technologically advanced, and the Great Pyramids were in fact crystal oscillators. Now, what a crystal oscillator is if you remember in the 60s, you got these quartz watches that said quartz timing, and oscillators basically you use a little bit of electricity to charge a crystal, a piece of quartz crystal, a tiny piece as big as a fingernail, that cause electrons, the carriers of the electric force that light up your light bulbs, to spin around inside of the geometry of that piece of quartz at different speeds. And the more electricity you apply, the greater the frequency, and the less you apply, the lower the frequency. But they basically have a range of frequency. Now, when you have an oscillator that is keeping time, as in Timex watches, it's all about how many oscillations you have per second, so that a second doesn't fall out of a second very often. So with a piece of quartz and a Timex watch, it's about 36,000 oscillations per second. But nowadays, they keep the most accurate time in the local universe using cesium clocks in Europe, where cesium oscillates, which is radioactive, about 8 or 9 billion times a second. So a second never falls out of a second. So you can always refer to the correct time using a cesium clock. But where crystal oscillators started to go next is that they were used basically in remote control. Nikola Tesla would make two pieces of quartz and produce the same frequencies in both of them. And whenever two pieces of quartz are at the same frequency, you have wireless communication between those crystal oscillators. So that's how remote control works. And eventually it led to how your phone and your cell phone works, because your cell phone has literally millions and billions of crystal oscillators inside of it, and quartz transistors, which are amplifiers of really weak signals inside of your cell phone. So remember, whenever two or more oscillators are at the same frequency, there's communication between them, at least at the speed of light, at the very least at the speed of light. And that's what we use, radio waves and microwaves, to communicate at the speed of light. But where this gets really interesting is, we're obsessed with making things smaller and smaller and smaller and going into higher and higher frequency microelectronics using quartz oscillators. But I looked at the Great Pyramids and said, wait a minute, the way these things are shaped, they, as a crystal oscillator, they would be producing square waves, but because they're shaped in the form of a pyramid, the electronic oscillations will start from a lower frequency at the base and oscillate towards the top at higher and higher frequencies and cause what's called a wave compression to happen. And wave compression is where faster than light signals are born. At the University of California, Berkeley, I talked to Raymond Chow, a physicist there, who had inadvertently, accidentally broke the speed of light by sending crystal light beams through ordinary sheets of silica. And silica, quartz is silicon dioxide. It's a oxygen-silica bond, and glass is just silica. It's not as hard as quartz. And he was only using silica, which is essentially thin glass, which is basically the same thing as quartz, but not as hard. And his photons, his particles of light, were going 3.14 times the speed of light. And this was in the late 80s, early 90s. And he eventually got up to 35 times the speed of light. So I called him up, actually got him on the phone, which is amazing. And I said, do you know why it's happening? And he said, no. And I said, well, I know why it's happening, is you're getting a highly, highly compressed wave. Because why? Because silica, under the microscope, at the molecular scale, the molecular scale means molecules, which are little balls. Remember those little toys you had when you were a kid, and you have like 3 balls and they have holes in them, and you put sticks and you form a triangle, right? Because that's what silica looks like under the microscope. It's a three-sided pyramid. Three-sided pyramid. And I went, well, it's a pyramid. Well, what does the pyramid do? Well, at the base of the pyramid, if you imagine an ocean wave bobbing up and down, and it gets trapped inside of a cone, like a pyramid, and it pushes through the cone, but the shape of the cone forces it to compress at the nipple or at the apex of it. So electronically, the same thing happens. Geometries force electronic waves to move through their shape, but with pyramids, they force them to compress at the top, and that's where the faster than light signal was born. And that's exactly what Raymond Chow found from the data, is the reason the signal went faster than light is because of the compression. The wave compressed. So next thing that happens, as at Princeton University, another Chinese-American physicist, Li Wang, and this was in ABC News, this was all over the world, but most people missed this story. He got light to go 300 times the speed of light. And he sent his crystal light source through cesium chloride. And cesium chloride under the microscope is a cubic, 4-sided pyramid, 6 4-sided pyramids formed into a cube. And I went, oh my God, 4-sided pyramids. I mean, here you have it again. You have the wave compression, and he went 300 times the speed of light. And that research at Princeton University disappeared. You can't find anything but the news article online. And I didn't stop there. So what I did is I said, if the Great Pyramid was not a miniature crystal oscillator, which is what we do today, but rather a massive, large crystal oscillator, the proof would be in the mathematics. And the math isn't really that hard. I mean, this isn't like super complicated physics. The way a crystal oscillator works is the electrons spin inside of the geometry of the pyramid semiconductive stone at less than the speed of light, but the signal they give off right at the surface of the stone, which is semiconductive material, same as crystal. Semiconductor means the stone or silica has free unbound electrons floating on the surface that are ready to use for amplification of a signal. So the electrons spin at less than the speed of light, but the signal at the surface of the speed is the speed of light. So all you have to do is divide the square distance. So imagine you're standing at the bottom of a square pyramid, and you measure the distance all the way around and divide it into the speed of light. And that's pretty easy. So I did that all the way up the pyramid, and I did it 4 times for each uneven side on the sides of the pyramid. And when I got to the top, this is the mother lobe. I got to the top of the Great Pyramid, and I measured the distance around at 570 something primitive inches. I don't have the data in front of me. Times 4 sides, divided into the speed of light, resolved in primitive inches, Egyptian inches, and the number I got was 5.151 megahertz. And I went, what? That's impossible, because the slope angle of the Great Pyramid was 51 degrees and 51 minutes when it had the original limestone casings. Why that number? Because that means the builder knew this was going to produce the same frequency at the capstone as the slope angle. You would have to know the speed of light when you built it to calculate that. And that means there's no way in the world. This is the first mathematical proof in the history of pyramidology that those pyramids were not built by Stone Age people. These are Star Age people, because you have to be a star civilization like we are today. We literally, we study astronomy. We know the speed of light. It was perfected in 1972. Not even in Einstein's era was the speed of light perfected. And it would have to be as perfect as it is now for me to divide in Egyptian inches the distance around the square wave of the capstone base of the pyramid into the speed of light in Egyptian inches and get that number. If it was the old speed of light in Einstein's era, I would not get 5151. So then what I did is I went, okay, there's this theory that the Ark of the Covenant belongs to the Great Pyramid and that Moses stole it, and that's why the Egyptian armies were after him. Now, that's a prevailing theory. I'm not the one who started that, but I decided I'm going to prove this mathematically, because there are many different cubits. God said in the Old Testament, make the Ark of the Covenant 2.5 cubits long. And I said, I'm going to redo the cubit and do it in Egyptian inches. I used the most common measurement that appears in multiple places throughout the pyramid, which is 2 cubits equals 41.21 Egyptian inches. So I cut 41.21 in half. I got a true cubit, which you can do right now with your calculator, and multiplied it by 2.5, the length of the Ark Covenant. I got 5151. The same number. I'm going to tell you what this number means, because this number is everywhere. It rules our entire multidimensional paranormal existence is ruled by this number. The 5151 is the slope angle of the Great Pyramid. 51 degrees and 51 minutes converted to digital, which is going from 6 base to 10 base, which is what we use today in electronics, is just under 52 degrees. Now, what's amazing is the Ark of the Covenant has the same number built into it, which means that's proof mathematically. Once again, math is supposed to be the most respected language in science. Why is the Ark of the Covenant 51.51 Egyptian inches long, and why is the pyramid's frequency, the capstone, 5.151 megahertz, and why is the slope angle of the pyramid 51 degrees? And it gets even more amazing, because Stonehenge is sitting at 51 degrees north latitude. Most of the crop circles in England are sitting inside of the 51 degree north latitude line.
So in a global perspective, being that there are other locations on the planet with this address, so to speak.
It's a vibrational address.
What does it mean? Yeah.
I like the way you're calling it an address, because it's not a location address as much as it is a vibrational address. We have, actually, Rosslyn Chapel sits at 5551 degrees north latitude. So whoever built these temples knew this sacred number. And this number gets so deep that I build these transmitters and I start transmitting the pyramid frequencies in my house. And that's when I opened up a portal and the helicopters came and they're trying to find where this signal's coming from my generator. And I turn it off every time because I can hear them coming. And ETs start appearing in our house, and gods and goddesses start appearing in our house. And I'm telling you, this really happens. That number is the address of the fifth dimension. We're in the fourth dimension, and the address, and I got proof, which I'll tell you about later, from a star being, that is the address to the next dimension up. So that's where this all goes.
It's fascinating. Yeah. Now, if I may, back up just a moment, and we'll proceed after the break. We're going to come up on a break here in a moment. Mm-hmm. It opened up a portal. That portal being somewhat of a stargate because ETs could travel right through into your home, and were they visible to you, or were they tangible to you, or how did you know that they were there?
Well, okay, that's how it starts. Is they literally one night, my wife and I are asleep. And we run these transmissions every night, and we both get this electric shock. We both jump out of bed at the same second. Our baby's asleep in between us. And my wife had always said to me, my wife Crystal said to me, because I in the past had the ability to see ghosts on a regular basis. I mean, I was going way back to 1994. I had this regular, my whole life, ever since I was 18, I'm 52 now, I've been meditating every single day. I mean, meditation is my way to higher consciousness. I did a few plants when I was 16 or 17, and I just quit all that because it was very foggy and made me sick. And I just said, I want to do this naturally. And my dad, who's a psychologist from Berkeley, is telling me about even the dangers of marijuana, believe it or not, how it's a resin and it coats your lungs and you're basically starving your brain for oxygen, and that's why your cells are dying in your brain. So I stopped everything. He convinced me to meditate every day because I wanted to get hot.
Welcome back, and again, my guest is David Sereda. David, you were just about to embark on symbols, that everybody has their own symbols. Can you explain that one for us?
Yeah, before I go into my experiences, I just want people to really understand where I'm coming from because it's not an accident that these kind of things happen to somebody like me, and some people, they start in life, like my brother was more interested in getting wealthy at a young age, and for me it was spirituality. I didn't really care about money as a young man. I cared about beautiful women, and I cared about when I was very young, sexuality, meditation, beautiful women, and getting high. So I didn't want to do drugs because I thought it was pretty cloudy and murky. And I just wanted to do this meditation. So I became a tree planter, planted over 1 million trees in my life, over 22 years. And I meditated like crazy. I went to Buddhist retreats, and I'm meditating 10 hours a day. With the Guru Osho from India, I lived with him for a year in Oregon, and I really did a lot of his. He had fantastic breathing meditations and cathartic release meditations. I just wanted to meet God. I wanted to know who else is out there. I don't want to be stuck on this planet. I don't really care about the icons in this world. They don't really interest me that much, other than people like Tesla and some very enlightened masters. I didn't really worship the symbols that a lot of people worship. In the world of getting naturally high, in the Western culture, I think we have a lot of attachment and motivation towards adrenaline-based high. You have this coffee fixation, you have, speed and, fast sports and high heart rates. And so because when you get into really high-frequency brainwave states through sports and even sexuality, you get this endorphin release that takes you beyond this feeling that you're just this body. But with adrenaline, you're always set back into the body and the pain in the body. Even somebody like Michael Jackson, who probably got a certain amount of his high as a young kid naturally. I mean, I grew up with Michael Jackson his music in the Jackson 5. I met one of his brothers, Jermaine, once. And I love those guys. I mean, they were getting high a really natural way through music, but as he got older, through the incredible dance maneuvers he was doing, he just couldn't keep that energy going without destroying his body, and his body started to get into incredible pain, and then he started taking painkillers because he doesn't want to feel the body. You want the endorphin high. But the high you get in meditation is so much better when you get good at it. It's so much better than I was a skydiver, an extreme skier. I used to jump off out, giant cornices and ski through avalanche chutes. I know that high. I know the high of jumping out of airplanes because I've jumped out of planes from 30,000 feet. Nighttime, I've got over 300 skydives. Know that high really well. But what you get in meditation and cosmic consciousness literally makes all of that obsolete. It's so much better, but it's so much work to do the meditations every day to get there. And once you get to a certain point where you get really high, once in a while you hit the jackpot and you get these massive spiritual experiences. And for me, I settled into mainly a Buddhist meditation practice. And there I was, freezing to death in this small tent, no money that year. The government took all my money out of my bank account from $1,000 I owed in back taxes. They wiped out $15,000 out of my account for finding me. And I had nowhere to live, and I pitched my tent on my dad's ranch. And during a rainstorm one night in Topanga, California, I left my body, and I met Christ, shining like 1,000 of our suns and blinding levels of ecstasy and cosmic consciousness. And he started teaching me. And then, within days, I could see ghosts. I could see the dead as clear as anybody sees each other, with my eyes open, not with my eyes closed. And I was starting to I really liked it, but at the same time, I had no choice of who was going to show up in my room. And one night, the morning after Princess Diana died, she was there, sitting at the foot of my bed, forlorn and slumped over. I mean, literally the next day. And the sun was up. And at this time, I was living in a giant yurt on a deck that I built. It's like a little cabin type of house. And I'm like, Princess Diana's there, and I covered the covers over me, and I'm breathing in my breath and my carbon dioxide. I'm like, I don't want to look again. I'm like, it can't be her. She can't really be there. Slapped myself a couple times, look, the cover's up. She's still there. And she's saying, I can't believe they killed me. And she's looking at me, and I'm like, no. No one's going to believe me that I met you. There's no way I can be responsible for this, to tell the world that you were murdered, and because it's not going to happen. And I wasn't even, at that time, I wasn't even interviewed by anybody in radio shows. And I was like, why me? Why did you pick me? I actually kind of ignored her and just waited for her to go away. And so this kept happening, and I literally have met probably in the order of over 300 ghosts with perfect visual clarity over the years. What was a problem for me is I had no control of who I was going to meet. In fact, one night, these 3 balls of white wake me up in my giant yurt, and one's fuchsia and one's reddish, and one is purpley blue and one's white. So there's 3 of them. And they're talking to me, and they're telling me they're Arcturians. And I'm like, what's an Arcturian? I mean, I'm Buddhist. I'm not really that New Age. I don't know about, different star systems. And they said they're from Arcturus, and I'm like, you better go, because I don't know who you guys are. And they were cracking jokes at me, but they're balls of light. There's no human shape. So they go zipping through the ceiling. I fall asleep. I chase them out of body, and they go aboard this giant mothership that was cruising off the coast of California. There must have been at least 3 of these ships that were as big as cities. So I'm asking my friends who are more New Age than I am, and I say, have you ever heard of an Arcturian? And finally, there's a book called We the Arcturians by Norma Milanovich, and she describes those same 3 colors as the Arcturian colors. And then years later, in the crop circle movement, these little balls of light the size of basketballs are filmed making the crop circles, and people claim they're Arcturians. And I'm like, yeah, they've been in my room, those same ones. But you see, I had no control. Now, when I started using the technology to do mapping the specific frequencies of Sirius A and B, our closest neighbors next to Alpha Centauri A and B, and I did the frequencies for the Pleiades, because NASA knows the radius. If you know the radius in solar radii of a star, I know how to calculate its frequency, which I'm not going to go into on the radio, but I can get its exact frequency. The same way Earth has a frequency, everything out there, every planet and every star has its own unique frequency. And when I started calculating frequencies, which is just really quick, it's the wavelength divided by the speed of light, or the wave guide length, which is the distance around the star or the planet divided by the speed of light to get the frequency. It's the same way you get it for Earth, the Tesla-Schumann resonance. For the Earth was thought to be 7.83 hertz, but Tesla measured it at Colorado and New York, and the distance around the Earth there is not quite as the distance it is around the equator. So I took NASA data on the radius of the Earth at the equator, and I got 7.5 something hertz, and then I did the pole-to-pole frequency, and I got 745. Well, I ran this by, in my house, Elizabeth Rauscher, the physicist that worked with Nassim Harriman, is a friend of mine and somebody that I really admire. And she said, David, when we were measuring the frequency of the Earth at the equator, we got 7.5 something. And she goes, we didn't know why. And I said, well, NASA knows the exact radius of the Earth, and that's the number I got. And she said, well, that means we're all wrong. We don't have the Tesla-Schumann resonance isn't the frequency at the equator, which means that's not Earth's base frequency. The frequency changes depending on where you are on the planet. And all of these people who are saying they're measuring the Earth's frequencies at 11 hertz and higher, it's like, no, you're living up in Norway somewhere where the frequency is even higher. Because the frequencies of a planet go from the base circumference at the equator, and the higher you go up towards the poles where the magnetic fields get tighter, the frequency goes up. So you get this scaling effect. So I did that for all these star systems. And what's really amazing about it is that frequency is the only mathematical number that it remains the same whether you're measuring the distance around the star or the planet in feet and inches, Greek feet, Egyptian inches, metric. It doesn't matter what counting system you use, as long as you resolve it to the finest unit of measure, millimeters or 1/32 of an inch, you get the same number. So when scientists say that math is the universal language, and scientists are looking for what is the universal language, and some say it's binary, which is just ones and zeros, which is the basis behind computer code. I say no, it's not binary, because binary is something we made up. The only number that remains the same regardless of your counting system and whatever math form they're using is frequency, which is how frequently an electromagnetic wave is going to oscillate around a waveform, be it a planet or a star or a moon. So I thought, wow, this is the language of the universe, which means when I say the frequency of a certain star in the Pleiades or Alpha Centauri B is almost the same frequency as Earth, every single planet and star is a slightly different radius, so they all have an exact frequency for their location, and those frequencies don't exist anywhere on Earth. So when you start to pulse your body with those frequencies, which is mantra in meditation, you start to synchronize. Remember the beginning of our talk, any two crystals that are the same frequency are instantly, there's a stargate or a portal of communication that opens up between them. That's how your cell phone rings. That's how the internet works. That's how radio communications work. Radio is a two-tune circuit. You need two crystals at the same frequency to open up a line of communication. So what happens if I change your frequency to the frequency of the Pleiades 400 light years away? This is where it gets really amazing. 444 light years away is the mean average distance of the Palladian suns, which are actually many different distances, some 300 and something light years, some over 400. So what happens is we are vibrating at the frequency of Earth mainly. We dream. See, we have these 5 major brainwave states. Let me just back up a second here. And this was never noticed before. I'm the first person to notice what I'm about to tell you. We have deep delta brainwaves, which are deep, deep meditation or deep, deep sleep state, which children are very good at going into. My friend Dami Egdiani is a brainwave mapper, and he actually mapped my wife and I's brainwaves during meditation, which is a really amazing experience. So, and 4 or 5 waves a second and less is delta, which is your deepest brainwave state. Above that is theta, and theta is where we dream between 5 hertz and getting up to 8 hertz. And the frequency of Earth is theta. So we dream in the same frequency as our own planet. That's where we all dream. And above that is the waking state. You get into alpha brainwaves, and then you get into 2 other higher frequency brainwave states. Above alpha, you have gamma and beta and gamma brainwaves. So what I did is I mapped, based on the exact radius of all 9 of our planets, I found every planet fit perfectly inside of the 5 brainwave states of the human being. And I went, oh, this is not a coincidence. This is not a coincidence, because they don't fall outside of the bandwidth of the human brain. They fit inside of it. Mars is an alpha frequency planet. Venus and Earth are theta. And Jupiter and Saturn, Uranus and Neptune are delta, deep, deep delta. And Mercury and Pluto are the higher, the beta and gamma brainwave states. So I thought, is it possible that our planets are producing and they're responsible for electrically inducting, which means transferring their waves to ours, to cause our brain to have these 5 major states of consciousness, which means we are electrically functioning at the frequencies of our own planets, which means we're cosmic beings. But our cosmos is our local solar system. And throughout different states of consciousness, from meditation, sleeping, to different types of human activities, we resonate more or less with one of the 9 planets. But we're always producing all 5 of these brainwaves. Now, very interestingly, these frequencies for the 9 planets are very precise, in over 10 decimal series long precision at their equators. Whereas most brainwave inductance for out-of-body travel techniques are very imprecise. They just give you, let's put the person in deep delta and get them super relaxed and see if they can, have an experience. And when I was designing my transmitters to open up stargates for astral projection to begin with, and to open up a portal to allow the sleeping astral bodies of people on even the 9 planets that within our solar system, I wanted the exact address, the frequency to 10 decimal points of accuracy. I didn't want 2 decimal points. I wanted 10, because I want it really, really precise. And before I go into the super stargate and how the star beings from distant star planets started to appear in our house, I want to step back a bit and stay in the solar system first. Now, both Dante Alighieri, the great Italian mystic, in his fasting and meditation and visions, found that when he left his body and he traveled to the sun and he traveled to Venus, he saw disembodied, luminous beings of different states of consciousness living in all 9 planets in our solar system. Pythagoras, the great Greek mathematician who did similar methods of fasting and meditation and exercises, was able to experience the same thing. Emanuel Swedenborg, the Swedish mystic, described the same thing. He actually described going to Venus which is what he deemed as the third or highest heaven he had ever visited. And in the third heaven, Swedenborg found that everyone was perfectly beautiful. Everyone was naked who lived there because it was like a Garden of Eden planet. But they were not living on the physical dimension that we call the physical dimension. And that gets really deep, too. So they were vibrating at a different rate. In fact, Pythagoras described it very similarly, that the beings living on the other planets in our solar system were vibrating at these.
Summer. The Hotel El Dorado is your Okanagan Fall Wine Fest destination. Join us October.
Not sure what happened.
What's going on there? All of a sudden, we've got David.
You there?
Yes.
There you go.
Yes.
Okay,
so go ahead.
This gets really interesting when it comes to frequency, because we think we're the only solid physical things out there. Mm-hmm. And we think, well, if somebody else comes into my house, they're going to be as solid as I am. And they're not. And I'm going to explain that in a way that you probably never heard before. And that is that look at the periodic table of elements, which contains every mineral and every single thing that we're made of, from gold to silver to aluminum to zinc to copper to silica to water to hydrogen and oxygen, which is water, and look up the resonant frequencies of everything that we are. And you'll find, as I did, that everything that we are is vibrating in the gigahertz spectrum, which means billion oscillations per second spectrum. And that is really fascinating, because what it means is that the physical component is vibrating all within a billion hertz range, 8 billion, 6 billion, 5 billion. They're all in these billion hertz ranges, the physical component of who we are. And we're now starting to communicate through the internet and cell phones approaching in 4G at the 8 gigahertz range. And we're talking about going into the trillion hertz range next. Nothing physical in this domain vibrates at a trillion hertz or higher. We're in this slice of vibration that we call physical, because when any two atoms come together and form different things, from wood to, ceramic tiles to steel and everything, it's all vibrating in the gigahertz spectrum. But if a physical component were vibrating in the terahertz or, quadrillion hertz, it would just pass right through it like a ghost. But if everything in this domain was vibrating in the trillion hertz spectrum, they would all bump into each other. So this is where it gets interesting, because our brains are quite slow in frequency. We've only mapped a very small component of the physical human. We've only mapped the brain and the heart, the heart is always in delta. It's always like 1 or 2 beats a second, and it's not really very fast. It's always in the deepest, brainwave state, which synchronizes with Saturn and Jupiter and Uranus and Neptune. So follow me here, because what I'm telling you is when an extraterrestrial shows up in your house whose atomic structure is vibrating at a higher or much lower rate than us, it can appear holographic, but they're not holographic to each other. They're holographic to us. We can pass through them and they can pass through us, but if they choose to vibrate at our rate, they become physical. And that's how UFOs are. That's how the NASA UFOs that have captured only showed up in NASA's ultraviolet spectrum. The cameras that are sensitive to the ultraviolet spectrum, the black and white cameras from my NASA UFO video days, that's where a lot of ghosts show up. In my years and years and years of seeing ghosts very clearly, I can tell you they contain all the same colors we're familiar with, but there are hues of those colors that we don't see. I mean, qualities of blue that are not available to us, but they're still blue. And in fact, one time I remember lying down, and I remember these basketball-sized orbs again floating above my wife's head the very night that she was praying next to me in the bed, and she didn't even tell me what she was doing, to them, to, I believe it was the Ashtar command, and these balls of light just come through the ceiling, and they're spinning around her head, and they were like turquoise and burnt orange colors. And I see them with my eyes open, and then I saw the neighbor pull up in his car, and the red taillights through the wall, not the window, through the wall. I was seeing it through the wall, and I'm like, what is going on? Why can I see the neighbor's car headlights, and I'm seeing these phenomena through the wall? And here's why. Because the way particles of light behave when they hit a target, a wall, is some of them bounce off to give you the picture that the wall's there. Some of them go right through the wall, and some of them interact through the photoelectric effect inside the wall. That's how it works. So my brain was so sensitive in meditation to see these really very few particles of light coming from the guy's tail light right through the wall, and I was seeing the spirit beings at the same time. So this is what happens. The problem with a lot of UFOs, in fact, I believe if you crash right into them with an airplane, there would be nothing there. There would just be plasma or an energy exchange, but they would not appear physical. They can reflect a certain amount of our light to give us the illusion that they're solid like we are, because particles of light do that. They go through things, they bounce off things, and then they interact inside of the thing, the material. So when I started transmitting to the Pleiades, those frequencies into our bedroom, oh my God, did it get incredible. It got absolutely incredible, because one night, both my wife and I at the same second jumped out of bed, and we're both looking at them at the same time. And I'm seeing these three beings of blue and kind of a turquoisey blue. It's a tone of blue you don't see on Earth, really. And there's a golden yellow. And they're human, and they're very tall. They're purely made of light. And they're sitting at the foot of the bed. And my wife, at the same second, has never seen a ghost in her life, always told me, David, if I ever see what you see, it's going to scare me too much. I don't want to see it. She goes, I don't mind hearing them, but I don't want to see them. She had always heard them. Well, she sees, I'm looking at Crystal, like, what are you looking at? Because I see these, and we didn't talk. She's seeing a little stick man on a bicycle pedaling. And I said, oh my God, that's perfect, because you always said you'd be afraid, and they don't want you to be afraid. And who would be afraid? A stick man. They're trying to show you that they're there, and we both got the same electrical impulse to jump out of bed at the same second, but she's seeing they're making her feel comfortable. And that is such deep communication, because it proves that they understand her fear, and they're respecting it, and they don't want to push her too far. And I'm looking at them, and what started to happen in our house, because this was about 3 or 4 years ago in August. My birthday on August 21st, about 4 years ago, was the first time I ran the Palladian harmonics through our house, and I actually played my wife singing this jazz song, "Fly Me to the Moon" by Frank Sinatra.
Back to The Truth Tonight. Glad you're here on a Friday night. If you missed the first hour, you really missed a lot, but we will catch that on the archive for you. David, you were just about to explain. I love this story about the stick man on the bicycle, because your wife was so afraid to see things, and or ghosts or aliens or whatever. So was this the part of the being that said it would project itself in a certain manner to your wife for the purpose of not putting your wife into a state of fear?
Exactly, which shows compassion, shows that I'm kind of jumping ahead, because I had a lot of contact with the Palladians before that, which I can go into a little bit of, but I've had so much regular contact with beings from that star system. It goes back to my first UFO sighting in Berkeley in 1968 when I was 7, and the following days, my mom was in the middle of divorcing and remarrying a science teacher, David Cooper, and we were living in a house with my new stepfather in the Berkeley Hills, where the Pleiadians were contacting me behind sleep every night. And my body would go into the paralysis, the normal sleep paralysis, which is common in some ET abductions, but they weren't abducting me. They were human looking. I mean, they're very different. Their eyes are different. They don't have whites. There were no whites in their eyes. They were tall, blonde, and at that time, they were so kind, and they were just teaching me how their craft worked, and they cared about me. But the paralysis would be so traumatic at times. One time I had a babysitter, and I woke up screaming because I finally was able to move my body again, and she came running down. I couldn't talk to my mom or my stepfather about it because I barely knew him. And there was no such thing as ufology in 1968 for me as a kid. I didn't know where to go. And I watched Star Trek in those days. So as I got older, eventually my mom, after about 8 years, divorced him, and I went back to my real father, Lynn Sereda, who was teaching me meditation in Vancouver, Canada, where he was living with my 4 brothers. So that's when I got tuned to meditation. I had no further contact with the Pleiadians at that time. When I built my first Pleiadian transmission device, which we now have available at the lightstreamtechnologies.com for other people who want to try this, but I was really frustrated. Like I said, I was seeing ghosts all the time, and I was seeing people from different periods in history. I even met Mary Magdalene, and she showed me how to decode the Mona Lisa painting, and I made a movie about it called Mona Lisa's Little Secret. And these things just kept happening, but I had no control. I was like an open radio that anybody could just pop into my room, and I'd look at them, and it's not the visual component that is actually difficult for me. What's difficult is the energy that some of these beings transmit is so powerful. Some of them are so advanced that my body will react with an electrical shock, and it can cause my arms to go flying around, and it makes me want to erase them, like make them go away, because not the visual part, because you're feeling them.
Right.
I mean, one time the Greek mathematician Archimedes appeared in my room, and he is so enlightened, and the transference of energy from him is so powerful that my physical body, I just started kicking him in the head and asking him to go away. Like, this is too much, you're too powerful. And the kicking is not involuntary. It's voluntary because I'm saying, you're too powerful for me, I can't handle you. And because I was studying some very advanced Archimedean mathematics at that time, and I was so lucky, there he was, in Foley in his Greek robes and hovering above me, but he's just too powerful. There's a reason that I believe Moses, when he climbed the mountain, and he set up markers, God told him to set up markers and told the people not to trespass past the markers or they could die if they got too close to his God because of the transmission of energy of some of these beings. They're so super powerful that electrically, we are electrical beings. You can measure your body voltage with a common voltmeter. We the average person might have 100 millivolts, which is 100 thousandths of a volt on their surface of their skin. So with a very highly powerful electrical being vibrating at a much higher frequency than us, if they vibrate at a higher frequency than the gigahertz spectrum where our physical component is vibrating at, then it's going to shock the system. And this is a really interesting subject because if you look at even the Shroud of Turin and the new proof that it is 2,000 years old, and that when the Tibetans have the same phenomena, it's called rainbow body. When a Tibetan master dies, their physical body emits this enormous amount of light, and it actually dissolves the bones and turns them into literally nothing, and they leave their scalp behind. So the radiation from that burned the cloth and burned the image of Christ on the cloth. And I've experienced that exact phenomenon. When my first meetings with Christ, I was out of body, and his power and his luminosity is truly beyond any being I've ever met by millions of times. I've met a lot of star beings, I've met a lot of goddesses and gods, and I've never seen anybody at that level of enlightenment, nowhere close. And one time he decided to show me in my yurt in Topanga which is right behind the inn of the Seventh Way, for people who know Topanga, up on the hills where I had my big yurt. Jesus appeared right in front of me as he was in the flesh, and I started to burn. That not my skin, it was like the radiations from his body were so powerful. He stayed in front of me for 3 seconds, and I went, oh my God, he was so strong and muscles like not a wimpy, frail hippie. And he had all these scars and marks on his face from living in the wilderness, and he had reddish brown hair, but more red. And his face was much lighter in color than I would have expected. And he was showing me that in the physical body cannot handle a master at that level, because it's not the spiritual transmission, the ecstasy and the love coming from Jesus. I literally overdosed on in the second meeting I had with him in 1997, but it's the physical body can't handle radiations that powerful, which would burn the fabric, physically burn it. And the reason I'm telling you this is because when you're talking about making contact from an extraterrestrial civilization, it depends at what level they're vibrating at, whether we'll be able to physically interact with them versus them passing right through your wall.
What about for them, David? You know, you're talking about the different resonances. What about for them? I mean, wouldn't they have to? They'd be coming into a more density here. Doesn't that affect them too?
Well, they probably. I mean, there are times, just like the experience with my wife, where she's seeing Stick Man and I'm seeing the three beings of light. There were times that Jesus would appear. These are in the Gnostic Gospels, and one of them is seeing him as a child running on the beach, and the other seeing him as an old man, and the other disciple seeing him as a young man, all in the same second, to show how powerful he was at being so far beyond physical that he could cause them, all three of them, to see him looking completely different, because he's just energy at that point. And there were times in the Acts of John, a gospel banned by Pope Leo the Great, where the disciple leans up against him and falls right through him. And there's times where Jesus never left any footprints on the ground when he was walking, which is a signature of an avatar. In India, if you're an avatar, which means you're a direct incarnation of God, you were born in full God consciousness like Krishna was, you wouldn't leave footprints when you walk because you're not really solid. In certain states of consciousness, you actually can go right through walls. And that's where many of these star beings are at. The Pleiades happen to be extremely high-frequency stars because they're very young. They're much younger than our sun. Our sun is an old, beauty. She's like billions of years old, and the Pleiades are not even a billion years old. So younger stars are at a much higher frequency, and physical beings living there would be vibrating at much higher frequencies than beings from an older star like ours. And therefore, their material spectrum, in their periodic table, they may have gold vibrating way beyond 8 gigahertz where we are, and it would simply pass right through anything physical in this dimension. So we say, well, that's just a ghost or that's an apparition. That's not an extraterrestrial, because they got to land a ship like the Titanic, and they got to walk out and step down the stairs and meet us, and that's why no one has accepted this phenomenon scientifically. But my understanding of science and measuring frequencies and understanding that frequency is the only number that remains the same regardless of counting systems, it is the language of the universe. And it separates one being from one star system and another being from another star system because their frequencies are so far apart that they can't possibly exist in the same room in the same visible spectrum. They just can't. We see a sliver of the totality of light that we call the rainbow spectrum, that we believe is everything. But we haven't understood that matter can exist at ultra high frequency states that we don't see. And that has actually been proven by physicists like Paul Dirac, who found in quantum physics that there are super high states of matter, super high spin states of matter, where you have matter there but you don't see it. It actually goes into another dimension. And that's done through high vortex, high wave compression spinning. And that's what my transmitters do. My transmitters, using pyramid math and pyramid technology, open up a high spin vortex in your house and don't just have random meaningless numbers going through the vortex. They have numbers of destination star systems like Sirius A and B, Alpha Centauri, Spica, the Pleiades, Vega. Vega was the star in the movie Contact with Jodie Foster. And see, I love that. I'm reading the book. I'm reading the book of Carl Sagan because he wrote the book for Contact. And I really think he's so brilliant as an astronomer and an astrophysicist and a cosmologist to understand that we're not going to be able to go to another star system with anything physical, because the law of physicality is that if you use traditional propulsion systems to accelerate matter in its current state, it can't go faster than light speed. However, at the heart of a UFO engine is what I believe to be one of these super vortex openers that doesn't create a wormhole to fold the fabric of space-time. It creates a wormhole to jump to the next dimension above us, which I believe is what the 5151 harmonic is all about. It's why the crop circles are all appearing within the 51 to 52 degree line in England, why Stonehenge is sitting at 51 degrees and 1 minute in north latitude, why Rosslyn Chapel's at 5551. And if you take pi, which is the formula to determine the distance of a circle, you take the diameter of a circle times pi and you get the distance around the circle, but it's a closed circle. And if you take 3.14, the full pi times 0.5151, you get the Fibonacci spiral, the 1 to 1.618, the golden ratio, which is an open circle. So the 5151, and I didn't figure that out. I'm just saying I figured out the frequency of the Great Pyramid capstone was 5151. I'm the one who figured out that the true length of the Ark of the Covenant is 5151. I'm the one who made the connection to that 5151 and Stonehenge and Rosslyn Chapel. But what was already known is that if you multiply pi by 0.5151, you get phi, which is the golden ratio. So it's kind of the key. 5151 is the key to take a closed circle and make it into a vortex, spiraling open circle that actually causes frequencies to accelerate or decelerate. It's like, the Fibonacci spiral is really the waveform that fits inside of the pyramid, which is phi, P-H-I, and that number exists all over the Great Pyramid. That's already been proven. It's been proven that phi is everywhere. So now we know the importance of 5151. So what I do is I transmit the pyramid frequencies in my house, and one of that I'm going all the way up the pyramid. So it starts at the base frequencies of the pyramid, and it reaches 5151, and actually goes all the way to 9191. But the numbers are way more complicated than that. And I have my device on. This is really amazing because I wake up and I turn my pyramid frequency transmitter on next to the bed, and these are the same devices we have at lightstreamtechnologies.com that are $1,800 for anybody who wants to get them, and I have way more advanced ones. And our goal up here in Canada is to build a retreat center with a huge one, which I think we can open up a super portal and invite star beings to come into our planet again. But I have the device on, and I meditate, and I fall asleep, and I just start leaving my body. And I'm very conscious. I'm a 33-year veteran in meditation every day, so this is not like I'm a beginner at this stuff. So I'm leaving my body. I see the bedroom, and I see this woman with blonde hair. She looks like a superhero, and she's pulsing. I can see her pulse rate. And she's a really high-frequency being. She races to the wall, and she grabs my transmitter with her hand. She looks at me, and she tells me that in Egypt, they use the same frequency to vibrate the entire Giza Plateau so that all of the priests and priestesses there could see and experience the fifth dimension, and that most of these gods and goddesses are vibrating way above the fifth dimension, but by opening a portal to the fifth dimension, it allows them to interact with us because they can't, this answers your question, they can't come into the density of the fourth dimension. They want to meet us a little bit higher than we exist, which is 5151. So she tells me that. I get up and I like, which track is, I look on my iPad because all the frequencies are in the iPad, and it starts at some very low numbers, so it could have been any number the moment she grabbed the transmitter. And I look, and it's 5151. It's playing as she did that. And this
is that amazing?
It's utterly astounding. And my wife, Crystal, had gone through this deep spiritual transformation, and we've been running the technology all the time, and she'd gone through this deep heart opening where she was crying a lot out with compassion and love for all beings and walking around the house. And she comes up to me one night, and she looks at me and she goes, tonight, Adele, the space being that she's in contact with, you're going to hear a tone, David, in the center of your brain, and it's going to activate you. And I'm like, wow, Crystal, I don't know how, Adele could know that, because I haven't heard a tone in my brain for years. So, in fact, I heard a really loud one, high-pitched frequency, not like ringing in ears, a true pineal gland activation, only months before I met Christ the first time. And so, anyway, I go to sleep, and my wife's meditating, and she looks at me, and she goes, can you hear it yet? And I'm like, no, I can't hear it. I'm really tired. I want to go to sleep, finish my meditation. She's meditating in bed all night. And all of a sudden, I jump out of bed. It's 3:33 in the morning on the digital clock, and my head is ringing like a tuning fork. It's so loud, it's going boo, like so loud. There's no way in the world. I was worried. I was like, what is the sound? Is so loud, and it's not stopping. It's not a figment of my imagination. I went around the house, got all my electric meters, my EMF meters, my trifield meters, and I'm checking, like, is the military broadcasting these tones in my head? How does my wife know this is going to happen? And my meters are all zero. The military's not broadcasting frequencies into my head. There's nothing. My meters are all flat, and I've got some very sensitive meters. And it won't stop. The ringing in my head is so loud. And after about 2 hours, it stops, and I go to sleep. And my wife tells me that the woman who came through the wall was Adele. This was this star being that has been teaching her for quite a while, and she tells her that they tried to give my pineal gland an activation, but it didn't work, so they had the Palladians do it instead. And this is kind of trippy, right? This is very, very out there stuff. So I go into my computer, and I go to all my Palladian frequencies, and I listen to each star system separated, and I match it to the tone that was in my head, and it's Pleione. If you go to the internet and you Google Pleiades, there's all these different stars in the Pleiades, and I converted based on the solar radar, I converted the frequencies of 5 Pleiadian suns, and the tone I heard is the same as the sound of Pleione. And just like NASA recorded the sound of our sun for people who followed my work in the past, and we used the sound of the sun to restructure water, which is very healing water, I found that the tone of that star cleared out and cleaned out my pineal gland so that I could have an activation, so I could see. The pineal gland is basically the light bulb of the brain. It is a photosensitive, light-sensitive gland that naturally produces chemicals that allow you to light up your imagination in the center of your brain. It's also the light of the third eye for the ancient mystics. And when we get older, especially if you ate, fluoride toothpaste and fluoridated water, fluoride causes the pineal to become as hard as a rock. It calcifies it. So you lose your inner luminous visionary center. And the tone, that night I was getting sick to my stomach, and Adele told me that's the fluoride draining into your stomach out of your pineal gland because the vibrations were so intense it was clearing it out. And we now have this tone. It's going to be available on audio CD for people who want to listen to it on their speakers to cause a pineal gland activation and clearing.
That's a great idea, especially because there are so many people out there now that are very on to the whole fluoride game and would certainly need something like that. And it sounds like from what you just described, David, that it basically, that tone, that resonant tone, basically breaks off that hard calcium.
Yeah, it's like a singer, right? At a very high pitch shattering a glass.
Exactly. That's exactly what I pictured.
It's
exactly.
Your pineal. In fact, the first experience I had with the pineal gland was 1994 in Los Angeles. In the middle of the night, I couldn't sleep this night. It was 2 a.m, and suddenly this blinding light lights up my entire body, and I hear this really high frequency sound, which is so powerful, and the light is so bright that I'm not able to move or feel my physical body. And each octave it goes up, this tone, which is very loud, I can feel less and less of my body. And it went up 9 octaves. And at the highest octave, I swear I was going to dematerialize, and I had no ability to find my fingers and my toes. I had no ability to move. In fact, I couldn't even think if I wanted to. It was like I lost contact with my brain. And then this is the weird part, is I hear this hammer chiseling at the center of my head. While this high-frequency tone is going on, I'm like, oh, my God, this isn't right. This doesn't sound right. They're hammering with like an ice pick at the center of my brain. And I somehow snapped out of it. And it took me years to understand what they were doing was they were knocking out the calcified pineal gland and breaking up the pieces. That was my first activation I had years ago, and then it would be only months after that I met Christ the first time in this super blaze of light like thousands of our suns. So the pineal is there's no coincidence that they put fluoride in our water and our toothpaste because they didn't want us to see. And you need to have this pineal gland cleared to have the ability to start to see and to start to not only see, but to receive the cosmic ecstasy in cosmic consciousness, which I can now go into almost regularly after over 30 years of meditation, has so much expanded velvety ecstasy. It's so good as a high, as I mentioned earlier. It far surpasses, skydiving, any adrenaline, sex, the best things you can imagine. It's far better than any of it. But it takes years and years of meditation practice it took me years and years of meditation practice and emotional clearing to be able to go into that state fairly regularly. And I imagine as I get much older that I hope to master those states on a more permanent basis. On one rare occasion, I had Christ take me through 7 of the ascending heavens that correspond to 7 superluminous states of consciousness, which are so mind-blowing, so utterly mind-blowing. There's no way to describe to any human being what it's like to be in those levels of consciousness. The Buddha describes in the Dhammapada the 7 stages of samadhi or superconsciousness culminate at the 7th level in nirvana. So the 7th is nirvana. When I went to, and the Buddha says nirvana is the only permanent realized state. The other states you just visit, you hang out in them for a while and get super blissed out, and then you're back to normal human suffering. And I didn't pierce the 7th with Christ. I saw it in the distance. The ecstasy levels there were just way beyond my ability. In fact, they were already beyond my ability when I crossed the 3rd heaven. But speeding forward, you see now, being in this world, seeing what we're doing to this planet, seeing that extraterrestrials want to come in and intervene and help us, but we won't let them physically come into our space because we have weapons that are threatening to them once they physically enter our space. I've been using this technology, the pyramid frequencies and star frequencies, and mainly the pyramid frequencies, to go to the fifth dimensional reality, where they have taught me how a spaceship works, how they, in the fifth dimension of Earth, live in a super paradise, and how they solved all of their political and religious and technological problems.
And welcome back to the last segment that we have here with David Sereda, my guest this evening. I want to remind everybody that Revolution Radio is listener supported, and we do not do corporate advertising. So it is for the purpose of being able to have these conversations on the air. We have over 50 radio show hosts and very amazing station that continues to grow in not only listenership but in hosts as well. So we want to thank the listening audience for contributing, and you have kept us on the air live for over 2 years, coming up on 3 years, and we want to thank you so much. If you deem it necessary to listen to a lot of archives because perhaps you aren't available to listen to the live shows, just go to freedomslips.com, go to the archive section, and go ahead and click on that. And for a very small donation, you have access to thousands, literally, of radio programs. So we want to thank you again. We couldn't do it without you. Thanks for being part of the team here at Revolution Radio. And my guest this evening, again, is David Sereda. He is all linked up at thetruthTonight.com. So if you forget or didn't write something down as far as how to get in contact with David, just go to thetruthTonight.com. He's all linked up. But again, it is lightstreamtechnologies.com if you want to follow along with us. You were just saying, David, which I think a lot of people are very interested, that we have flying saucers in our airspace, if I heard you right, right now. Is that true?
Yeah, we have many dimensions of Earth right now, and I mentioned where there are flying saucers, and I want to first say that I'm making a film about what we're talking about tonight called Inside the Quantum Pyramid. So if you go to Indiegogo.com and search the Quantum Pyramid, you'll see it there. And my film, Quantum Communication, had probably over 3 million views on YouTube for free. And these films need your support to get made, and that film really got killed by people putting it up and changing the name on YouTube. And I want to make this next film, but I'm not getting any support right now on Indiegogo for it. So it's only got about 2 weeks left, and it's over. And if it doesn't get funded, it'll be a poor man's film versus a much nicer film. But anyway, going into opening up a portal, see, what I've done so far with my technology is opened up a portal only using about 35 watts going through my generators that many people are buying now and having their own experiences with. But what I want to do now is open up a much larger portal. And so I built the next level of transmitters that can handle more power. And they also have a bigger coil and a bigger magnetic field. And this really got amazing because when I started transmitting at the next level, what started to happen were physical things started happening in the house. Physical things started disappearing. One thing is when I would, do and focus on a Sirius, like the Sirius star system, I started pulsing that star system. And in the middle of the night, my iPad would just come on, and it started playing this track of this New Age music track that I created for my films called Sirius AB. And out of hundreds of songs in my iTunes, it picks that one and just turns it on. Now, remember I said that our internet is actually at the point now that we're reaching in 4G up to 8 gigahertz. And that the material world, steel, ceramic tile, everything that your body's made out of bone and water, everything we have is in the gigahertz spectrum, right? So it's all the physical component of what we are can be manipulated when our electronics start to vibrate at higher and higher gigahertz. The heavier metals like gold and some of the radioactive metals are around 8 gigahertz. They're in that range. But when you get to oxygen vibrates at 60 gigahertz, and then there's another band of oxygen at about 120 gigahertz. So the lighter elements on the periodic table, the gases, are vibrating higher, but they're still in the gigahertz spectrum. So what happens when I open this portal with more power is that they're coming back to me and they're picking a song out of my iTunes and turning my iPad on, which doesn't happen. And then they did it again. One night, my iPad came on and started playing a track called Pleiades, which is really mind-blowing considering I'm communicating with that star system. But then it got more amazing. Is every night when I go to sleep in my house, I finish my meditation, I'm really high, I'm floating through the kitchen, I'm turning off the lights, I look at some tomatoes and I see them as living beings. I'm like floating around, everything's translucent and the walls seem like they're not even real. I go into my daughter's playroom and I turn out her light and go to bed. Now, I do that every night. I always turn out my daughter's light in her playroom, this little lamp. It's an LED light bulb. It gets very hot, and I just turn it out. The next morning, I wake up. My wife goes, the baby, Alira wants to go play in her playroom, and she turns on the light, and the light doesn't come on. And I'm like, wait a minute. I just turned that out last night. The light bulb can't be dead. Those are 25-year bulbs. The bulb is gone. The light bulb is gone. There's no way in the world that a light bulb just unscrews from inside a lamp with a lampshade on and disappears. So we ripped the entire playroom apart because we couldn't believe it. There's no way my daughter woke up in the middle of the night. She doesn't even know how, at not even 3 years old, to unscrew a light bulb from inside of a lampshade. And we looked everywhere in the fridge. There's no light bulb. It's not in the couch, it's not on the walls. And then we moved. We moved because of, things getting too intense in that country with spying and everything. And actually, I'm friends with Kevin Smith, the radio show host, and when I was last on his show, he was telling me how he was reaching 25 million people, and mostly in Asia. We were talking about microwave beam weapons and how they can use them to induce a heart attack. And sure enough, Kevin just died of a heart attack. It's not even very, and to me, that's just, he's a healthy guy. I've met him. There's no way in the world I believe that was natural causes. But anyway, moving forward, the light bulb, when we moved, we searched the entire house. We searched everywhere. It's not like the ETs unscrewed it out of the lamp and put it somewhere else in the house. It was gone. It never showed up. We cleaned the entire house. I turned that light out myself that night. And this is where, when you get into larger questions about opening up vortices, is it merely communication with another star system that could be hundreds of light years away, or can you physically move things? This is miraculous because my brother, Michael, was friends with a guy named Jeff Reeves who lived in Chesterman's Beach in Tofino, British Columbia, who built the Pyramid House. And this house was the exact slope angle of the Great Pyramid facing magnetic north. And as he's building the house, and I've slept in, I've been in that house, it's an incredible energy there, perfectly flat ground. He tells one of his workers to throw him a box-cutting knife, which lands on the ground right next to his feet. He turns to hammer a nail and reaches down to get the knife, and it's gone. And he doesn't take this as a minor incident. He does what I did with the light bulb. He scours the entire surface of the ground. He tells all the workers to stop working. They looked everywhere, every inch of the soil. It was gone. Now, going forward, on one of my Palladian transmissions, pulsing our room with the frequencies of the Pleiades, that night I addressed, with intention, Palladian Council, and I asked them, were the pyramids used to physically teleport persons through the Stargate to another star system, as opposed to using it as a telecommunication device? And that night, not the next night, not 5 nights later, that night, I don't know how this happened, Anubis, the Egyptian god of the underworld, who is the big black dog, the big god of the underworld. In fact, Robert Temple, who wrote the Sirius Mystery, wrote a book on the Sphinx called The Mystery of the Sphinx. and he believes the Sphinx was originally Anubis, having the body of a dog and not a lion, and that the pharaoh cut Anubis's head off and put his own face on there, and that he really builds the case that the Sphinx is actually Anubis. Anubis appears to me in the dream, this beautiful, shiny coat of fur and a collar of gems, and he's wearing these bracelets around his wrists, and he's big. He's not a little jackal. He's a big dog, and he's telling me that a huge, massive earth shift occurred, and this would have been over 10,000 years ago, and he goes into the Great Pyramid, he turns it on, and it starts spinning this vortex. It opens up this beam of light above the capstone of the pyramid, is so focused, it rips the hole in the fabric of space-time, and him and I go through the wormhole, and we jump through it, and we go to another star system. And he said when this event happened on Earth, there were many pyramids. He said many of us escaped and went through the wormhole in the pyramid, and many didn't make it. And he said when the Earth settled and the new people found the pyramids, they still worked, and we appeared to them. He's telling me this in the dream. And they worshiped us as gods, but we were just more advanced than them, and we taught them for, he said, a long time. Now, this is really amazing, because I wasn't thinking of Anubis when I went to bed. I was addressing Palladian Council. He didn't show me the planet that we landed on, but I realize now the missing light bulb, which is actually a year, not even a year later since that meeting with Anubis, because that was coming into December 21st, 2012, when I was running Palladian frequencies every night with meditation. Very important. These things may not happen to you if you're not meditating and you're not developing there's a whole program I get people to go on taking certain minerals. I now also have nano gold that is pyramid frequency gold. It's made with the frequency of the Great Pyramid capstone. So you ingest this gold, just like you have colloidal silver and colloidal gold. I make my gold at the pyramid frequency, which is really high vibration, high monatomic gold. That it's also at lightstreamtechnologies.com in the catalog there if you download it. So there's a whole program that you go on to increase your bioelectricity, and also people wear my pendants which are vibrationally treated, that electrically raise your body's vibration. We tested before and after aura camera photography, seeing a huge energy increase in the aura with these pendants. But when we tested the pyramid frequencies on 3 women in Sedona, their auras got brighter than researchers had ever seen. I mean, they were phenomenally, blindingly bright after they did sessions doing the pyramid frequencies. So we had a lot of scientific proof that this technology was working. But when we go to the question about opening a vortex wormhole that is not folding the fabric of space-time of a distant point, it's opening you up to the next dimension. And in the next dimension, there's less resistance to move physical objects. Therefore, physical objects in a higher dimension can go faster, much, much faster with way less energy. And in very high dimensions of Earth, the movement of flying saucers is almost instantaneous, not only on that higher dimension of Earth, but the higher dimensions of the whole universe. And that's what they were teaching me on how the flying saucers work. It's not wormholes, which is physically impossible with today's Einsteinian Rosenbridge physics, which says you need the negative energy of 100 million suns for a whole year to produce a wormhole just to fit a quarter through, let alone a spacecraft, because that's folding 2 points in space-time. But what they're teaching me is that's not how it works. You go to a higher dimension where the density of the atmosphere is so low that you're getting closer and closer to a true vacuum where there's no resistance to movement. And that happens when atoms become more and more singular as opposed to dual nature vibrations, which is what we have in our dimension. So it's happening. There's no way, you can't just slough off a pocket knife being thrown on the ground inside of a pyramid house and disappearing on perfectly flat ground. A light bulb for me, I mean, I know my house. I know there's no way in the world there was anybody who could have come in the house in the middle of the night and taken my light bulb. And the doors are locked. There's no way in the world my daughter did it because she's asleep with us, sleeping in between us, and she wouldn't do that. She doesn't know how to unscrew a light bulb. And if she did, she would have put it somewhere, and I searched the entire house. So they're taking me step by step by step. First, they're showing me communication on a regular basis. I've had dozens of visits with the Pleiadians, very detailed visits where they're telling me about my whole life and how they've been watching me since they appeared to me when I was a kid in Berkeley in 1968, how they lost contact with me, how they regained contact with me when I built this technology, why my technology works, because the DNA has proven to send faster than light signals by German physicist Fritz Albert Popp, but also I mentioned two other experiments at Princeton and Berkeley where scientists, mainstream physicists, got signals to go faster than light using materials that on a molecular scale are made of pyramids, and why pyramids actually compress electromagnetic waves and force them to go faster than light. Now, the important thing about the quartz and the silica in an electronic sense, in building a device to cause wave compression through the pyramid structure of silica, is just as important to ingest it. Silica is normally abundant in our vegetables and some fruits, but our soils are getting more and more depleted, so we don't get enough crystal content in our bodies. And we also need gold to bond with the silica in order for us to build up our biotransistor, biocrystal oscillator, so that we have the ability in ourselves physically to start producing these oscillations. And so that's why I get people on, my pyramid frequency gold and other things that we have to slowly raise their vibration. So the programs that I'm talking about, I'm going to be doing retreats here in Canada for people who are interested to learn the whole program on how to meditate properly, why a lot of meditation techniques don't work that we learned from India because of the language barrier, and how to increase your crystal oscillations in your body using liquid crystal and also working with crystals, and then targeting certain star systems that you personally identify with and meditating and really starting to vibrate with those those star systems. Now, going back to the planets, when I first discovered that I could calculate the frequencies of our planets, and remembering that Pythagoras and Emanuel Swedenborg and Dante had many visits to the 9 planets, and all testified that they're inhabited by deceased human beings and masters from different star systems, or are living in different dimensions of our planets that appear to have nobody living on them. I decided to pulse my body one night with Jupiter. And I pulsed my body with Jupiter, and it wasn't the night, it was that night, not 2 nights later, not 3 nights later. I was out of body on one of Jupiter's moons, and there were these giant 8-foot-tall gods and goddesses wearing breastplates of this purpley platinum type of metal with lightning bolts flashing between their chests. They were 8 feet tall, and I was standing in this stadium holding my transmitter in my hand, and they looked down at me, and they said, "He will become as one of us." And they said, "You need to make those bigger because they really work, and that we are watching." And as they're saying this, their lightning bolts are flashing between their chests, and they're telling me that we're watching Earth right now and how badly we're treating it. And they said, "We will intervene, and we have been watching you for a long time." And this is really amazing that this would happen, because when you go in the mythology of the ancient Italian, the god Jupiter is the same as Zeus for the Greeks. He's the god of lightning, and there I am seeing this. And when you go to sleep at night, you can think of something and say, "I want to dream about this," but you don't dream about what you're thinking about. You think about what you're thinking about, but when you get into theta in the early morning hours, you're not dreaming about what you're thinking about. You dream of something else. It's not like you have control of what you're going to dream about. And I couldn't have possibly imagined this stuff. So weeks later, actually it was months later, I decided to do Saturn. So I don't just jump around every night going from one planet to another. I create a space. And so I finally decided I'm going to do Saturn. I do Saturn's frequencies that night. They're very low delta brainwaves. They're ultra low. They're 0 point something frequency. They're not anywhere near the frequency of Earth. And that night, I'm in this dream where I'm with a young woman who's carving angels on this purpley platinum metal. And she stops her artistry and she says, I'd like you to come and meet my father, Tesla. And I'm like, what? Tesla never had a daughter. Well, I guess he does now. And I go to meet Tesla, and he's this young man, and it's like Tesla was super young, and he's really exciting. He has a lab, and he reaches into my brain with his hands, and he adjusts something. And he says, now go look in the mirror and see who you really are. I look in the mirror, and it's like the Matrix. My body starts to glow with this light, and it gets brighter and brighter. And suddenly there's a rip and a tear in my chest, and this blinding light rips out of my chest, and I just explode into this super cosmic state of consciousness with so much ecstasy. And I become this ring of light that's just expanding out into the cosmos for a whole hour. I mean, that's what happened to me doing the frequency of Saturn. How could I possibly have imagined that before I went to bed? In my 33 years of daily meditation, I can tell you that, yes, you can go into deep, peaceful states of consciousness. You can go into deep bliss. When you get really good at meditation, the bliss gets really good. But I can't control and I can't have these experiences on this regular basis like I'm having, combining harmonics with meditation, harmonics of different planets. I haven't even done Uranus and Neptune and Pluto yet, because every time I have one of these experiences, I want to kind of sit back and go, whoa, take it in.
Sort of revel in it. Yeah, no doubt. David, we've only got a couple of minutes to go. I can't even believe we've just 2 hours just flew by.
Yeah, and we're just getting warmed up, so we'll have to.
And we're just getting warmed up. Yes, we will have to do this again. Listen, I want to mention to the audience about the Body, Mind, Spirit Expo coming up in November 2nd, right, in Vancouver.
Yeah, I'm speaking at
Canada.
The Body, Mind, Spirit Expo in Vancouver, BC, Canada, and it's just Google Body, Mind, Spirit Expo, and it's $25 to come to my lecture there. And I'll have, my products at my table over the weekend there. So for people who, can make it there, people from Seattle maybe and Vancouver and.
Oh, sure, in northern Bellingham area, all those people can just cross right over the border and see you. And I do know a lot of people out there, so I'll definitely send them a notice. I'll send them the article. We'll put all of this in it for you. And, of course, you'll keep in touch with us for anything future that you're going to be doing. And I guess I should say even though I am not in Canada, welcome to Canada. It sounds like that's going to be a good place for you to hang out for a while there.
Yeah, it's I feel a little safer here. I also have a 3-year-old daughter, and I just, with all the stuff that's going on, with the spying and me not feeling comfortable being, I'm not doing anything illegal, but seeing what happened to Kevin Smith and not believing that was an accident, because him and I were just talking about that. And I could do a whole show with you on intrusive technology.
Sure.
That is very
I think
terrifying.
that people do need to get educated on that as well, David. So, we would definitely love to have you back. And I'm glad that we were able to hook up for this show as well. We're also very busy. So, I'm real glad that this all worked out. And I want to remind everybody also about Kickstarter. We did put the Indiegogo link into the chat room. I'll also put that in the article for you there, David, and we can absolutely.
Thank you so much. I hope people will support this film. If not, like I said, I'll do it. It'll be a poor man's
What's
film.
The name of the film, real quick, before they cut us off?
Inside the Quantum Pyramid. And there's a short little video clip there at Indiegogo that's to go 300 times the speed of light. And he sent his crystal light source through cesium chloride. And cesium chloride under the microscope is a cubic four-sided pyramid, six four-sided pyramids formed into a cube. And I went, oh my God, four-sided pyramids. I mean, here you have it again. You have the wave compression, and he went 300 times the speed of light. And that research at Princeton University disappeared. You can't find anything but the news article online. And I didn't stop there. So what I did is I said, if the Great Pyramid was not a miniature crystal oscillator, which is what we do today, but rather a massive, large crystal oscillator, the proof would be in the mathematics. And the math isn't really that hard. I mean, this isn't like super complicated physics. The way a crystal oscillator works is the electrons spin inside of the geometry of the pyramid semiconductive stone at less than the speed of light, but the signal they give off right at the surface of the stone, which is semiconductor material, same as crystal. Semiconductor means the stone or silica has free unbound electrons floating on the surface that are ready to use for amplification of a signal. So the electrons spin at less than the speed of light, but the signal at the surface of the speed is the speed of light. So all you have to do is divide the square distance. So imagine you're standing at the bottom of a square pyramid, and you measure the distance all the way around and divide it into the speed of light. And that's pretty easy. So I did that all the way up the pyramid, and I did it 4 times for each uneven side on the sides of the pyramid. And when I got to the top, this is the mother lobe. I got to the top of the Great Pyramid, and I measured the distance around at 570 something primitive inches. I don't have the data in front of me. Times 4 sides, divided into the speed of light, resolved in primitive inches, Egyptian inches, and the number I got was 5.151 megahertz. And I went, what? That's impossible, because the slope angle of the Great Pyramid was 51 degrees and 51 minutes when it had the original limestone casings. Why that number? Because that means the builder knew this was going to produce the same frequency at the capstone as the slope angle. You would have to know the speed of light when you built it to calculate that. And that means there's no way in the world. This is the first mathematical proof in the history of pyramidology that those pyramids were not built by Stone Age people. These are Star Age people, because you have to be a star civilization like we are today. We literally, we study astronomy. We know the speed of light. It was perfected in 1972. Not even in Einstein's era was the speed of light perfected. Frequency, there's communication between them, at least at the speed of light, at the very least at the speed of light. And that's what we use, radio waves and microwaves, to communicate at the speed of light. But where this gets really interesting is we're obsessed with making things smaller and smaller and smaller and going into higher and higher frequency microelectronics using quartz oscillators. But I looked at the Great Pyramids and said, wait a minute, the way these things are shaped, they, as a crystal oscillator, they would be producing square waves, but because they're shaped in the form of a pyramid, the electronic oscillations will start from a lower frequency at the base and oscillate towards the top at higher and higher frequencies and cause what's called a wave compression to happen. And wave compression is where faster than light signals are born. At the University of California, Berkeley, I talked to Raymond Chow, a physicist there, who had inadvertently, accidentally broke the speed of light by sending crystal light beams through ordinary sheets of silica. And silica, quartz is silica and dioxide. It's a oxygen-silica bond, and glass is just silica. It's not as hard as quartz. And he was only using silica, which is essentially thin glass, which is basically the same thing as quartz, but not as hard. And his photons, his particles of light, were going 3.14 times the speed of light, and this was in the late 80s, early 90s. And he eventually got up to 35 times the speed of light. So I called him up, actually got him on the phone, which is amazing. And I said, do you know why it's happening? And he said, no. And I said, well, I know why it's happening is you're getting a highly, highly compressed wave. Because why? Because silica, under the microscope, at the molecular scale, the molecular scale means molecules, which are little balls. Remember those little toys you had when you were a kid, and you have like 3 balls and they have holes in them, and you put sticks and you form a triangle, right? Because that's what silica looks like under the microscope. It's a 3-sided pyramid. 3-sided pyramid. And I went, well, it's a pyramid. Well, what does the pyramid do? Well, at the base of the pyramid, if you imagine an ocean wave bobbing up and down, and it gets trapped inside of a cone, like a pyramid, and it pushes through the cone, but the shape of the cone forces it to compress at the nipple or at the apex of it. So electronically, the same thing happens. Geometries force electronic waves to move through their shape, but with pyramids, they force them to compress at the top, and that's where the faster than light signal was born. And that's exactly what Raymond Chow found from the data, is the reason the signal went faster than light is because of the compression. The wave compressed. So next thing that happens, as at Princeton University, another Chinese-American physicist, Li Wang, and this was in ABC News, this was all over the world, but most people missed this story. He got light, meaning somebody communicating via means that they're not normally supposed to be communicating through, and that's what alerts them. So when you're doing something that's opening up a portal, I mean, it's a red flag. And many times, my wife and I, when we had these devices on, the helicopters would just come right for the house, and we just rush to turn it off. And near the very end, before we left, we actually just left them on, just to let them really see it, because we knew we were going to be leaving. But what I have discovered, something in the Great Pyramid that is so shocking that it literally, because math is so respected, supposedly so respected, I'm really flabbergasted that nobody in the academic world has come to me and said, there's no doubt that it's inarguable what you've discovered, and it's absolute mathematical proof that the builder of the Great Pyramid was a civilization that was technologically advanced, and the Great Pyramids were, in fact, crystal oscillators. Now, what a crystal oscillator is if you remember in the 60s, you got these quartz watches that said quartz timing. And oscillators basically you use a little bit of electricity to charge a crystal, a piece of quartz crystal, a tiny piece as big as a fingernail, that cause electrons, the carriers of the electric force that light up your light bulbs, to spin around inside of the geometry of that piece of quartz at different speeds. And the more electricity you apply, the greater the frequency, and the less you apply, the lower the frequency. But they basically have a range of frequency. Now, when you have an oscillator that is keeping time, as in Timex watches, it's all about how many oscillations you have per second, so that a second doesn't fall out of a second very often. So with a piece of quartz and a Timex watch, it's about 36,000 oscillations per second. But nowadays, they keep the most accurate time in the local universe using cesium clocks in Europe, where cesium oscillates, which is radioactive, about 8 or 9 billion times a second. So a second never falls out of a second. So you can always refer to the correct time using a cesium clock. But where crystal oscillators started to go next is that they were used basically in remote control. Nikola Tesla would make 2 pieces of quartz and produce the same frequencies in both of them, and whenever 2 pieces of quartz are at the same frequency, you have wireless communication between those crystal oscillators. So that's how remote control works, and eventually it led to how your cell phone works, because your cell phone has literally millions and billions of crystal oscillators inside of it, and quartz transistors, which are amplifiers of really weak signals inside of your cell phone. So remember, whenever two or more oscillators are at the same...
Very good evening. Thanks for tuning in this evening, The Truth Tonight Talk Radio. I'm Roxy Lopez. We have a great guest this evening, so you might want to buckle down. I know a lot of you who are very interested in my guest's work and background and experience. It's quite fascinating. We're going to jump right into it because there is a lot to cover here. So I'm going to omit my general first 5-10 minutes of what's going on in the world today. And we're going to jump right into this wonderful interview. Of course, you know, my guest this evening is David Sereda. And his first aspiration in life was to become an astronaut, believe it or not. And in 1968, David and a friend witnessed a UFO along with hundreds of other witnesses. After this experience, David grew up as a UFO enthusiast. Of course he would, never living in doubt of the phenomena that was swept the world since the Roswell incident in 1947, which was huge. His interest in space, religion, philosophy, astronomy, and science led him on his career in related fields. He has worked deeply in high technology, on environmental and humanitarian issues, and as a professional photographer for over 20 years. He has studied world religion, science, physics, and paranormal psychology for over 25 years. Other interests include alternative energy, propulsion, and anti-gravity. And over the years, David Sereda branched out into quantum vibration, jewelry, and harmonic resonance. And in 2013, David's lectures have been focused on something absolutely fascinating, and I can't wait to hear all about it. It's about the new technology he extracted from the mass in the Great Pyramid of Egypt as a giant crystal oscillator that allows for faster-than-light communication with a Stargate system. This is fascinating. He'll also share his numerous experience with alien contact. You might know David Sereda from a fabulous 240-minute documentary entitled From Here to Andromeda. And in brief, we may touch on this because it's absolutely one of the most stunning documentaries I've come across in the past. From Here to Andromeda opens with the possibility that humanity may not survive due to global warming and ensuing ice age or mass extinction. The question is, why hasn't humanity embraced sustainable technologies like solar, wind, helium-3 fusion to beat global warming? Why are the oil companies holding us hostage? Good question. Why hasn't all of humanity awakened and taken measures to ensue our survival? This has come up over and over again, the idea that we are owned by the energy companies. And it really does hold us back as a planet. There are many UFOs that are suddenly appearing all over the world, by the way. And are they here to teach us? Are they here to help humanity make a quantum leap? I do believe they are. If you want to take a look at one of the websites that David has, it's called www.lightstreamtechnologies.com. We'll go ahead and put that in the chat room for you. Tonight, David is going to explain to us his latest findings about the Giza Plateau and quantum entanglement. Two objects that are quantum entangled communicate with one another in an unknown, instantaneous manner that Einstein called spooky action at a distance. It has recently been discovered that this doesn't just apply to subatomic particles. Two diamonds have been entangled, and not only that, they were brought together at all, but rather encoded with identical vibrations. This implies the possible existence of a powerful new tool, and David Sereda makes the leap that the structures on the Giza Plateau might actually be such a tool capable of connecting us to distant parts of the universe in a whole new way. So, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce to you Mr. David Sereda. David, welcome to the show, and honored to have you, and thanks for being here.
Roxy, thanks for having me on your show. I just traveled from Sedona, Arizona, and my wife and baby and I, and crossed the border, where we're now exploring living in the Great White North. So to do much deeper experiments where we can be more undisturbed by the obsessive spying and observing of our people, our supposedly free people. So I had to get out of there because actually when I started doing a lot of these transmissions using pyramid technology and opening up portals between Sedona and other star systems, there were too many disturbances by the military, radar planes flying right over our house and Black Hawks flying right over our house. And I actually ended up meeting at a toy store in Phoenix last Christmas when I was looking at little remote-controlled toys for my daughter. A guy who was working in there was a Black Hawk helicopter specialist who had had a serious accident in the war in Afghanistan. And he was just telling me how they have these antenna arrays hooked up to the helicopters, and they can see every transmission device, every waveform of every electronic device via their computer screen. And he was telling me all the frequencies they look at. And I was actually describing to him, one of my transmitters, and he said, we see everything. It's kind of like the Matrix for them. They're looking literally at numbers, which are what frequencies are, and they're seeing if there's any abnormalities in the world of transmissions, because that's where you would have a potential supposed threat,